What's the fastest way you have seen someone ruin their life? My ex cheated on me with a mentally unstable woman. One night he lied about working late so he could go meet up with her. When she got angry at him, she decided to punish him by filing false charges. He was pulled over and arrested just 2 blocks from her apartment complex. He spent Christmas locked up in the offender unit of one of the worst county jails in the country. The case never went to trial. The grand jury no-billed him due to a complete lack of evidence, but the damage was already done. He lost everything: me, his affair partner, his main job, his volunteer work, his side job, his savings account, his credit, visitation rights with his daughters from a previous relationship, his car, most of his friends, and several family relationships. He ended up moving back in with his mother. To make things worse, he still has the arrest record because he can't afford to have it expunged, so it appears on every background check. It was only about 4 hours between the time he called to say he was working late and when the police pulled him over. 4 hours that completely destroyed his life. Story 2. My brother lived next to a very religious family with 7 kids. The 2 families became close, and my brother's 2 daughters grew up alongside theirs. The neighbor's oldest daughter started dating a real piece of work. It caused a serious rift between her and her parents, so she moved in with her grandmother. The boyfriend stayed in the picture, and the grandmother, kind as she was, didn't have the energy to control her granddaughter. One night, the boyfriend convinced her they could attack the grandmother and make it look like a break-in. They'd take her credit cards and live happily ever after. But things went even worse than their already insane plan. They lost control of the situation, and after implementing their plan, they put her into the trunk of her car and drove off. They were caught within 12 hours. The only things they managed to buy were a pizza and some beer. Now both of them are serving life without parole. Story 3. I'm a 30-year-old man, and I want to tell you about my sister, how she destroyed her life after starting an OF account. It's a cautionary tale about how easy it is to get caught up in the allure of social media fame and how quickly things can spiral out of control. My sister was always a bit of a wild child, outgoing, adventurous, and always chasing excitement. She loved to party and have a good time, but she was also smart and ambitious, with big dreams of becoming a model or actress. When she heard about OV, she was immediately intrigued. She saw it as a chance to showcase her talents and build a following. She started posting revealing photos and videos, and before long she had a loyal base of fans willing to pay for access to her content. At first, things seemed to be going well. She was making good money and gaining a small measure of fame. A few agents and casting directors even reached out, showing interest in working with her. But then things started to unravel. My sister became obsessed with her account, checking messages, creating content, tracking her followers. Everything else began to fade away. She stopped going to work and stopped seeing her friends. Isolation set in, and the pressure to maintain her image drove her to alcohol and drugs. Over time, her of presence became her entire world. She barely slept, rarely ate, and began to lose touch with reality. Paranoia and delusion took over. She became a shell of her former self, someone I hardly recognized. In the end, her addiction to the platform and to the lifestyle it created destroyed her. She lost her job, her friends, and her dignity. Eventually, she became homeless and passed away alone from OD on the streets. I share this not to judge, but to warn. What seems like an easy path to money or attention can become something much darker, an addiction that consumes everything. Be careful and think twice before making a decision that could change your life forever. Story 4. Back in my 20s, there was this guy who joined our friend group. He started bringing his new girlfriend around, and honestly, she didn't seem very loyal. I didn't know him super well, but I tried to warn him that she might not have the best intentions. He didn't believe me and took her side, so we stopped talking. Later on, she tried to get involved with me too, saying some pretty unkind things about him to get my attention. I wasn't interested and turned her down. A few months later, I heard she was pregnant. It all happened fast, probably the quickest example I've ever seen of someone's life taking a serious turn. Edit. Didn't expect this story to get so much attention. For context, this was about 10 years ago. He cut ties with everyone in our group afterward, so we never found out how things turned out. Whether the baby was his or not, I'll probably never know. Story 5. I've told this story before, but I recently found out what happened to the girl. Back in high school, there was a girl who got pregnant about halfway through my 11th grade year. At the time, she was dating a guy who claimed he was the father. A couple of months into the pregnancy, they broke up. After that, her ex-boyfriend started saying there was no way the baby was his, that she must have already been pregnant before they ever got intimate. She denied it completely, insisting he had to be the father because there hadn't been anyone else. She kept trying to get him to admit that the child was his, but eventually she gave up, especially after a pretty messed up twist. She started dating her ex's cousin. The baby was born while she was still with the cousin, and for a while, things seemed to calm down. But after they broke up, the drama started again. She began claiming that the child was either her ex's and that he should be paying child support, or that since she had been with the cousin, he should be the one to support her and the baby. She was so convinced that one of them had to be the father that she decided to take both men to court. The court ordered paternity tests for each of them, and it turned out that neither was the father. As a result, the judge ruled that neither man was obligated to provide support. The whole ordeal cost her a lot of money in court fees, and in the end, she was left a single mother. Last I heard, she wasn't seeing anyone and was working at McDonald's. The entire situation spiraled over the course of about 1.5 to 2 years. Story 6. A bit of background first. My uncle is a wealthy man. He's single, has no kids, and has managed to save up quite a bit of money over the years. His life savings were around $250,000 with no loans or debts. Not bad for a 42-year-old man. One day, we went to Crown Casino in Melbourne, Australia. It's a pretty popular place, and we were just there for the all-you-can-eat buffet. But my uncle noticed the slot machines and table games and decided to check them out. My brother and I stayed at the table while he wandered off. Apparently, he bought about $205,000 worth of chips and went straight to the blackjack tables. He told us later that he had experience, so he felt confident. But things went south fast. He lost over and over, yet kept playing, determined to win it all back. By the time we were ready to leave, we had no idea how bad it had gotten. He was already down about $116,000 and still wouldn't stop. We went home, assuming he'd be right behind us, but he stayed at the casino. The next day, he showed up at our door, asking to speak to my dad. According to my dad, my uncle had lost his entire life savings gambling and wanted to borrow money. My dad refused, knowing he'd probably just lose that too. We didn't hear from him for a few weeks after that, but eventually found out he'd taken out a bank loan to try to get his life back together. Moral of the story: never gamble without a trusted friend or family member there to keep you in check. It's far too easy to lose everything before you even realize what's happening. Story 7. I've seen someone ruin their life in the fastest way possible, by getting addicted to fast food. My younger brother was always a bit on the chunky side, but he was active and healthy. When he turned 16, he started working at a fast food restaurant and quickly developed a serious addiction to the food he was serving. At first, he'd just eat a lot of it for free while on shift, but before long, he was spending all his money on fast food, even when he wasn't working. He started skipping meals at home, skipping school, and even skipping work, just to hang around the restaurant and eat. Over time, he became isolated, depressed, and unhealthy. Within a few months, my brother had gained a significant amount of weight, developed high blood pressure, and was at risk of diabetes. He was no longer the happy, active kid he used to be. He'd become a shadow of his former self, all because of his addiction to fast food. I tried to help him, but he was too deep in it to see the damage he was doing to himself. It was heartbreaking to watch him fall apart so quickly, ruining his health and confidence in such a short amount of time. In the end, he had to seek professional help to overcome his addiction. It took a long time and a lot of hard work, but eventually, he started to rebuild his life. Story 8. This woman my partner knows. She made some terrible choices. She's often commented on our posts, saying we have a sweet relationship and that she hopes to find something similar, someone she can build a family with and be happy with. She's also commented on photos of my children, saying my partner seems like a great father. My partner has a wonderful bond with my kids, and they call him Dad. He's been in my daughter's life since birth. We met while I was pregnant, and he's raised her as his own. She's admired the promise ring he gave me and often said she finds our story inspiring. She's even admitted to feeling a bit jealous of what we have. One day, she posted on Facebook saying she had met a great man. Soon, she began sharing photos of them together and talking about how happy they were. She even mentioned that he was a wonderful father figure to her daughter. I reached out to her kindly, letting her know I was happy she'd found someone who made her feel loved. I also reminded her to take things slow. I explained that while my relationship with my partner might look beautiful and happy on the outside, it took time, patience, and healing to get here. I told her about my own journey being a single mom, surviving trauma, and learning from my past before finding a healthy relationship. I just wanted her to know that real love takes time, but she told me, no, he's the one. Within a month, he had given her a promise ring, proposed, and soon after, she was planning to move in with him along with her teenage daughter. Now here comes the sad part. She commented on a post I made, a family announcement, and wrote, "We're trying for a baby. Isn't that great?" It felt strange, almost like she was trying to compete with my news, but I chose to stay kind. I deleted her comment and once again advised her to slow down and be cautious. A week later, she announced she was pregnant. Not long after, things took a dark turn. The man she was with became controlling and aggressive toward her. Then, something deeply tragic happened that affected her daughter as well. Eventually, Child Protective Services got involved. They told her she could stay with her stepfather and keep her daughter with her, but her boyfriend wouldn't be allowed there due to a pending investigation. Despite that, she chose to move out and reconnect with him. At least, that's what we later heard. She left her daughter and tried to build a life with this man, convinced she was doing the right thing and that her child would benefit from having a father figure. Over time, her family disowned her, and her daughter sank into a deep depression. People in our community turned against her. Eventually, the man left her for someone else. She was left homeless and pregnant. I don't know where she is now, but the choices she made had devastating consequences for her and her daughter. When she compared her relationship to mine and called theirs more romantic, I felt furious. I told her I would never tolerate anyone hurting my child and that I would protect them at all costs. She is nuts. Story 9. Back in 2005, Rory was an electrician who took on a tough job no one else wanted, but it came with premium pay. The deal was $90 an hour for the first 40 hours, $135 an hour for hours 40 through 60, and $180 an hour for anything beyond that. He was working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, pulling in more than $8,000 a week. For a while, life was good. He paid off his house, bought a brand new, fully loaded Ford F-150 with cash, and built up a solid savings. When the project finally wrapped up, he was laid off, but with money in the bank and no debt, it seemed like the perfect opportunity for a fresh start. When Rory got back home, he fell into old habits and started using drugs again. About 4 months later, I saw him driving a beat-up Honda. He had traded in his brand new pickup truck for $400 worth of drugs. He had already paid off his house, but after he stopped paying for insurance, tragedy struck. The house burned down. Thankfully, no one was home, but he and his wife lost everything. They ended up living in one of the local drug hotels. His wife had started performing favors for whoever the front office sent to their room, just to cover rent and drugs. Another electrician we knew, Gerald, who had become a major dealer, once delivered $25,000 in cash to the hotel owner. One night, Gerald went to the hotel looking for a favor and was sent to Rory's room. Rory's wife was already busy with someone else, and Gerald waited for a while before getting irritated that she was taking too long. That's when Rory offered to take her place. A little later, another electrician named Joe, who often acted as muscle for Gerald, came by to check on him. When he opened the door, he found Gerald lying back on the bed next to another man, while Rory was with Gerald and Rory's wife was with the other guy. After that night, I saw Rory around town a few times, but before long, he completely dropped off the map. Within 6 months, he had gone from owning a paid-off home, driving a new truck, and living comfortably, to staying in a rundown drug hotel, trading away his dignity just to get high and keep a roof over his head. Story 10. It wasn't my ward or department, but a nurse who transferred up to help us during a short-staffed shift filled us in on what happened. She looked really upset when she arrived. At first, we figured it was just because no one likes being moved to an unfamiliar unit, but no, it was because of this. About 9 months earlier, a vacancy opened up for a Band 7 position. One of the nurses on their team, highly skilled, knowledgeable, and genuinely kind, applied. She was already the favorite for the job, and rightly so. She got it, and she turned out to be an incredible manager as well as a fantastic nurse. Even after her promotion, she still worked regular clinical shifts, often nights, and was loved by her patients. She was one of those rare managers who truly put her staff first. She understood that when a team feels supported and valued, they work harder, take care of each other, and provide the best care possible. Under her leadership, everything improved. Morale, teamwork, patient outcomes, every measure of success went up. Senior management was so impressed that they decided to fund her PhD. She was being set up for an amazing career ahead. Everything was going great until a patient we'll call Linda was admitted to their ward. From the start, Linda was difficult to manage. She constantly complained about poor treatment and even accused a junior nurse of doing things that turned out not to be true. Among her many claims was that her pain medication was being tampered with. She insisted that it wasn't working and said it felt like it had been replaced with sugar water. Because of her complaints, the hospital had to open several investigations, bringing in independent staff to make sure everything was handled properly. A pharmacist was asked to review the medication records, especially the controlled drugs, and at first glance, everything appeared to be in perfect order. Nothing seemed to be missing. In hospitals, controlled medications require 2 nurses to be present. Both must check the stock, prepare the dose, administer it to the patient, and then sign off together. It's a careful process designed to keep everyone safe, but like any routine task, it can become easy to cut corners when the team is busy or short-staffed. Over time, a small shortcut had crept into their ward. Both nurses would check and sign the paperwork, but sometimes only one would actually give the medication. It saved time, but it wasn't the proper procedure. This is where everything started to unravel for their manager, the one everyone respected so deeply. Investigators noticed a pattern. The patient's complaints only happened when the manager was on a clinical shift. When questioned, the rest of the team admitted they often trusted each other and didn't always double-check the final step. Sadly, it turned out that the system's weakness had been exploited, leading to a serious breach of trust. It turned out that the new role had been far more stressful for her than anyone realized. She had started taking medication from the ward to help herself cope and sleep, a decision that changed everything. She was dismissed immediately, and her entire team was heartbroken. They'd been such a close-knit group, genuinely happy in their work for the first time in years. Losing someone they admired and trusted so deeply hit them hard. From what we heard, she chose to give up her professional registration rather than go through a full investigation. After that, she found work in a local supermarket. It was such a sad end to what could have been an incredible career. All the progress, hope, and positivity she brought to the team vanished overnight because she didn't reach out for help when she needed it. In the end, all of the other allegations made by Linda were disproven. It turned out she had been struggling with dependency issues, which likely explained her paranoia and the confusion behind her earlier complaints. Ironically, if the manager hadn't gone as far as she did, things might have stayed hidden for much longer. But honestly, it's best that the truth came out. There's never an excuse for that kind of behavior, no matter how much pressure or stress someone is under. Hurting others, even unintentionally, can never be justified. And just like that, in the span of a single afternoon, her promising career and everything she'd worked for were gone. Story 11. One of my old best friends got involved with this girl who was an absolute wreck, a horrible influence, and he managed to screw his life up completely in just 6 months. This girl was a total loser. She refused to work, was a complete slob, and contributed nothing to society. She did pretty much nothing but smoke weed, eat Cheetos, and watch TV all day every day. She was rude as hell too. My biggest gripe with her was that she was a litter bug. It drove me insane. It was such an odd match because he actually had his life together. He had a decent job, was about to finish his bachelor's degree in computer science, and even had a position lined up with the company his uncle worked for. Our entire friend group tried to talk some sense into him, but he just wouldn't listen. Fast forward 6 months, he dropped out of school, developed a serious weed dependency, got fired from his job, and started defrauding the state of Nevada for unemployment. He lied about why he was terminated, got caught, and ended up owing the state about $14,000 in back pay. The problem was, he and his girlfriend had already blown all the money on weed, psychedelics, and fast food. He had to move in with her parents and sell his beloved Subaru just to pay it back and avoid jail. Around that time, he also did me dirty, turned into a full-blown pathological liar. We all got sick of his crap and told him to take a hike. Last I heard, she left him. I have no idea what he's doing now, and honestly, I don't really care. It still blows my mind how badly and how quickly he managed to wreck his entire life. Story 12. I used to work with a girl who married a man convinced that 2012 would be the end of the world. He racked up $30,000 in debt buying pills and spent several months high, waiting for the apocalypse that never came. On top of that, he hadn't been paying his taxes. When the world kept turning, he was left with addiction issues, alcohol, and whatever pills happened to be his drug of choice at the time. She used to tell us about finding hidden liquor bottles all over their apartment. Once, she opened a storage closet and was buried under a pile of trash bags filled with empties. He eventually got a DUI while we were working together and lost his job, all while still owing money to multiple institutions. And here's the thing, all of this happened before she married him. He already had all that baggage, and she still chose to jump into the pit he'd dug for himself. She was only 18 or 19 at the time, and he was pushing 30. The age gap wasn't what bothered me. It was seeing someone so young start life so far behind because of a man who had already wasted his 20s. It broke my heart for her. Story 13. My wife's stepbrother never had the best home life. His parents divorced and his dad was rarely around. He loved driving trucks more than being with his kids. As a teenager, the kid got into trouble here and there, fighting and acting out. But he wasn't a bad person. Not the brightest, maybe, but generally a nice enough guy. Things really went downhill in high school after he moved in with his older brother. About 3 weeks before graduation, he just stopped going to school altogether. I know, that doesn't sound like one single moment that ruined his life, but just wait. By around 20, he started to realize that being barely employed without even a GED wasn't going to get him far. It didn't impress women either. He'd managed to land a decent job as a welder and was even talking about getting his GED. I didn't know all the details. I'll help anyone who wants to help themselves, but I don't waste time on people who won't try. Maybe that makes me a bit of a jerk, but that's how I am. Anyway, for a while it seemed like he was finally turning things around. The problem was, no one knew he had a growing gambling addiction. Then one day, he blew his entire paycheck on lottery tickets. All of it just 4 hours after getting paid. When he realized what he'd done, he panicked. With no money left to pay his bills, he made a terrible decision. He decided to rob a liquor store. That single moment destroyed his life. He walked into the store wearing his work shirt with his name embroidered right on it. Now he's awaiting trial for felony robbery. Even if he avoids serious prison time, his future is basically gone. He'll never get a decent job, and women generally aren't drawn to men with no prospects. He's 21 years old, and addiction has already ruined his life. Story 14. My cousin, like most of my family, including my dad and uncles, worked in the flooring business. Carpet, tile, wood, you name it. During the subprime lending boom and the Iraq War years, business was booming. My siblings and I would sometimes help my parents after school or during the summer to meet deadlines on homes that had already been sold and were waiting for their new owners. Every so often, buyers would stop by to check on the progress of their new houses, to take pictures, choose paint colors, or just see how things were going. One day, a buyer brought his family to look around, and the wife accidentally left her purse behind. My cousin's wife found it, took it, and kept it in their work van. She ended up writing herself a check for $5,000 and depositing it. Of course, she was caught and arrested. In our state, any check over $2,500 counts as a felony and is automatically referred to the district attorney's office. She served time, and her husband, my cousin, was fired from the flooring company. Because the construction community is so tight-knit, word spread fast, and they were never able to find work in flooring again. He eventually took a janitorial job, earning a small hourly wage and getting paid bi-weekly, a painful drop from the thousands he used to make weekly on per-job contracts. They lost their house, their cars, and just about everything they'd built, all because of one impulsive, incredibly stupid decision. Story 15. Many years ago, a friend of mine moved to Las Vegas. Several months after settling in, he called me out of the blue asking for money, not to be bailed out, but for what he called an investment opportunity. He told me that if I gave him $5,000, he could turn it into $10,000 in just 1 week. Then he started explaining the details, which I'll get to in a moment. But even from the start, it sounded sketchy as hell. I turned him down immediately and tried to talk him out of investing in what was obviously a scam. After we hung up, he called another friend of ours, who by coincidence was sitting right next to me at the time. He gave him the same pitch, word for word, asking for $5,000 and promising to double it. That friend also told him not to do it. Fast forward a week later, the same friend called again. This time, he told me he'd been scammed out of $55,000 and was stranded in Atlanta with no way to get home. How did he even come up with that kind of money? Well, he had some savings in the bank, maxed out his credit cards with cash advances, borrowed from a few other friends, and even lied to his parents, told them he needed money to buy a car, then funneled it straight into the scam. Eventually, he had to call his parents back, confess what happened, and borrow even more money just to get back to Vegas, pack up his stuff, and return home. Last I heard, he ended up filing for bankruptcy. Apparently, he had met a con artist who told him they were going to pick up a large amount of high-end merchandise, designer clothes, watches, jewelry, and so on, and then sell it wholesale to double their money. The scammer asked him to rent a luxury car for appearances, so they could look the part. My friend agreed. The two of them drove from Las Vegas to Atlanta and checked into an upscale hotel, which of course my friend paid for. Once they were there, the con artist took all the cash, actual cash, not transfers or checks, and told my friend to wait in the hotel for a few hours while he went to handle the pickup. By the time my friend realized what had happened, the guy had a solid head start, several hours to disappear completely. Of course, my friend never found the guy again. From the start, the con artist had used a fake name, fake contacts, and a completely fabricated story. My friend spent years trying to track him down, even went back to Vegas a few times to talk to the people who'd first introduced them, but he never got anywhere. He didn't recover a single dollar, and apparently he didn't learn his lesson either. About 10 years ago, he reached out again saying he was planning to start a business in a developing country in South America because labor was cheap. This time, he said he was being asked to invest between $15,000 and $20,000. I told him again that it sounded like a bad idea and that I didn't agree with the whole plan. That was the last time I ever spoke to him. From what I've heard since, the business failed, and he ended up back home. Story 16. There was a guy I went to high school with. He was a star football player, one of the best in our school, which was among the top in the area. He could have had a real future if he'd applied himself, but he always had that wannabe gangster attitude, acting like he was from the hood. When we graduated, he didn't want to go to college, didn't even apply. I think he started selling drugs with his friends, living that so-called trap life as they called it back then. But that's not how he ruined his life. What did it was when he was 18. He and a few of his friends broke into an old man's house, probably thought it was an easy target. What they didn't plan on was that the old man was a veteran who kept a pistol on him at all times. When they came face to face inside the house, the old man didn't hesitate. He opened fire. If I remember right, there were 3 of them, including the guy I knew. 2 were hit, 1 ran out the front door, and another jumped through a window to escape. I'm guessing my classmate was in the lead because he never made it out. By the time the police arrived, he was slumped in the hallway dead. Just like that, he went from a promising athlete to a dead kid in some old man's hallway at 18. I still wonder what his last thoughts were as he lay there bleeding out. He never really got the chance to grow up. Story 17. I had a friend, my first and best friend from middle school. We were closer than brothers, and it was the same for him. He was my rock, and I was his. He was an incredibly talented drummer, especially in marching band. The guy could pick up complex college-level licks and rudiments in just a few hours. It was unbelievable. He even got to play with UCLA and USC's drumlines at 14 and didn't miss a beat. When his mom passed away when he was 15, everything changed. He started using drugs, drinking heavily, and getting lost in a lifestyle that wasn't him. I saw him again earlier this year around March, and honestly, I didn't recognize him at first. It took me half a minute to realize who was calling my name. He was so thin, with dark circles under his eyes, greasy hair, and a look that broke my heart. I felt awful, completely helpless. What could I have done? He had run away from home, dropped out of school, wasn't on social media, and had almost no family left besides his dad, an aunt, a couple of distant cousins, and a brother in the Marines. I haven't seen or heard from him since. For all I know, he might be gone, and I'd never even know. Story 18. I had a friend years ago. Always kind of an odd guy, but he had a good heart. One day I was hanging out with him and a few other friends, and he told us he was going to get a tattoo the next day. He said he had this super cool idea but wouldn't tell us what it was because he wanted it to be a surprise. We saw him about a week later. He had tattooed 3/4 of his face green. No design or pattern, just solid, dark forest green. The only part left untouched was the upper right quarter of his face. The rest was completely green. He was fired from his job the very next day. I kind of lost touch with him not long after that, since he moved to another city. I later heard he ended up living in his car. I still have no idea why he did it. He had a really good job in IT at a pretty big company and was making decent money. I just can't imagine what made him think permanently turning 3/4 of his face green would be such an awesome idea. Edit. I have no idea why he got fired. It was about 15 years ago, and the company he worked for seemed pretty stuffy. For all I know, maybe he actually quit and just told us he got fired. Maybe he went in and did something crazy or inappropriate that he neglected to mention. No clue. As for the tattoo artist, I have no idea who did it. For all I know, he paid some meth head to do it. I don't have any tattoos myself, so I'm really not an expert on the topic. Still, I've got to think there are some unscrupulous artists out there who don't care much as long as they're getting paid. Story 19. A couple of guys I knew in college were Division I athletes, but for a niche sport nobody really followed. One night they got drunk and decided it would be a great idea to bleach their initials into the AstroTurf on the football field. Really bad idea, but it got so much worse. Turns out bleach and AstroTurf create a chemical reaction, fire. They ended up burning down the entire field of a Division I football stadium. The damages totaled hundreds of thousands of dollars and made national news. It was bad, like really bad. Everyone thought they had done it on purpose, like some kind of terrorist act. Their only defense was basically, no, we're not terrorists, we're just idiots. The saddest part was that they got expelled from college during their senior year, never graduated, and kind of descended into loserdom almost immediately after. Just typing this still bums me out. Story 20. I used to work in the German social welfare system as a Sachbearbeiter im Sozialamt. One of my clients once told me he thought my calculations were wrong after his wife left him because he wasn't getting enough money. I asked if he had any expenses I didn't know about, but he was sure he'd given me all the information. I told him to bring me all his invoices, vouchers, and receipts, which he did a few days later. I started going through the papers and found a payslip I hadn't seen before. According to my records, he was receiving social welfare at that time, and I had no information that he was employed, which meant it could have been social welfare fraud. I kept reading and came across a Versicherungspolice, an insurance policy for a BMW 5 Series. You should know that back in the day, a car counted as salvageable capital, meaning he would have been required to sell it and use the money for living expenses, groceries, rent, that kind of thing. This was the mid-90s. The rules are different now. Then I found the purchase contract for the car, expensive, and bought in installments. And finally, I found the bank contract for the loan he'd taken out to pay for it. So I called the bank and asked them why on earth they had given such a large loan to an unemployed social welfare recipient. The woman from the bank immediately started to panic. That was brand new information to her. While she was trying to explain what had happened, apparently the loan had defaulted because my client stopped paying. I started to notice something strange about the payslip. You have to know that in Germany, the old 4-digit postal codes, including the sub-local code like 1000 Berlin 44, were changed to a 5-digit system, 112345 Berlin, in 1993. But the payslip he had given me was dated 1995, and it still had the old 4-digit code. He forged the payslip to get a loan for a car because his wife told him he needed a better one to keep her. So he went through with it all, but the bubble burst when he couldn't afford to pay the installments. And simply because he asked me to recalculate his finances and brought all his information without organizing it properly, I was able to prove that he had committed several felonies, which, by the way, doesn't necessarily mean he'll go to prison or even get arrested. He told me the story. I explained what I had to do next and what might happen over the coming weeks. Both of them were later charged and convicted of social welfare fraud, insurance fraud, falsification of documents, and obtaining bank loans using false income information. Story 21. My ex-girlfriend, in a desperate attempt to repay a loan shark, sprayed mace at the opening manager of a Blockbuster and stole the bank deposit bags. After that, she picked up her niece and nephews, all under the age of 8, and casually drove around with them. She was eventually felony stopped on a major roadway. Her photo ended up as the top story at 10 lead-in for that evening's news. It happened during the NBA Finals that year, either Game 6 or Game 7, so there was a huge viewing audience. She was easily recognized and caught because her best friend was the store manager at that same Blockbuster, and she spent a lot of time there. In fact, she had even dropped off a job application the day before. She went on to spend the next 3 years in a women's prison. Story 22. I was friends with a guy, and through him I got to know his younger sister, smart, pretty, and doing great in college. After meeting a guy, she decided to get married just a few weeks later without telling anyone. She moved in with him, and soon after, he said he was having back problems and couldn't work, so she kept going to classes while also working nights to support them both. Meanwhile, he spent most of his time at home while she handled everything. She also started joining him at parties, and it came out that they'd both been experimenting with drugs. She eventually dropped out of college, just a few credits short of graduating. By then, her parents and friends were desperate to help, offering her a place to stay, support, and encouragement to finish school. But she and her husband decided their debts were too much to handle. They left their cars at the bank with notes saying they didn't want them anymore and disappeared. They sent a short message to her parents saying they were heading out west or to Mexico, and no one has heard from them in over 15 years. Later, there were troubling rumors about what might have happened, but nothing was ever confirmed. My friend told me he believes she may no longer be alive, though her parents still hold on to hope that she'll come home someday. They used to be such joyful people, but that hope is all they have left. Edit: since this story is getting a lot of attention, here's some more context. She really loved her parents and didn't even want to go away for college. She chose to commute to a nearby university in the city. She was a junior when she met him. It was surprising when things started to change. We used to smoke weed sometimes, and she always looked down on us for it, so seeing her suddenly into things like acid and ecstasy was completely out of character. Her family wasn't particularly religious, but her husband got her really fixated on the Book of Revaluations. One of the last times I saw her, we were all high, and she told me the world was ending soon and that I needed to read Revaluations myself. It seems like they disappeared on purpose to escape their loan debt, and some people think they may have even changed their identities. Among our friend group, there's been a lot of speculation. One person believes the husband might have had ties to a religious group, and that she could be living in a secluded community somewhere in northern Mexico. But honestly, I agree with her brother. It's more likely that things took a darker turn. Addiction runs in their family, and she went from not drinking at all to using drugs every day in a really short time, leaving behind everyone who cared about her just to keep that lifestyle going. It's the kind of pattern you see too often when addiction takes over. Story 23. When I was in the Air Force, a new guy joined our unit. Not long after arriving, he went out to a bar, decided to drive home, and got a DUI. He lost all his rank and had to pay a huge amount in fines, but leadership went to bat for him and he was allowed to stay in the Air Force. 2 months later, while struggling to pay his mounting legal and lawyer fees, he did something incredibly reckless. He drove home drunk from the same bar and got arrested again. This time, he lost his license and was kicked out of the military, which meant he lost all his income while still buried in thousands of dollars of debt. But that wasn't even the worst part. A few months later, he decided to celebrate being a civilian by, you guessed it, going to the same bar, getting drunk, and driving home. He was arrested once more and spent some time in jail. To make matters worse, that third DUI also included charges for driving without a license, since it had been suspended after the second offense. I can't imagine he has many career opportunities left with a less than honorable discharge and multiple arrests on his record. Story 24. In less than 24 hours, my ex-neighbor's ex-girlfriend went viral for a racist road rage rant that someone filmed and posted on Twitter. I remember reading the news article and thinking about her for some reason, even though the woman wasn't named. It wasn't until months later that I found out it had been her. She was fired from her $300,000 a year job the very next day and immediately started receiving death threats. She had to move in with her boyfriend. When she tried to find new work, people would look her up online and react in disbelief. She spent $10,000 on a reputation defender service, changed her name, and was shunned by much of her family and many friends. Her boyfriend, whom she had hoped to marry, broke up with her because he couldn't handle the months of depression that followed. Eventually, she left the state altogether. Story 25. My sister's husband. When I first met my sister's husband, I had a bad feeling about him. Something just seemed off. He didn't come across as trustworthy or dependable. Still, my sister decided to move in with him, later got pregnant, and eventually married him. Almost 3 years ago, they were still together, raising 2 daughters. They ended up getting evicted from their apartment, but somehow managed to find another place to live, which was surprising considering how hard it can be to rent after an eviction. Unfortunately, within just a few months, they were facing eviction again. When they were dating, he actually had a job, but now their oldest daughter, who's almost 16, doesn't remember a time when her dad was working. When they were about to be evicted again, his solution was for my sister to start calling everyone she knew, asking for help, instead of trying to handle the situation himself. She reached out to our stepbrother's wife, who's very successful and financially comfortable. This woman could easily have helped them out, and she and I have always gotten along well, though we're not close enough that I'd ever feel right asking her for money. Still, she was generous and offered to give them what they needed. No strings attached, not even expecting repayment. Our stepmom advised her not to give them the money. She said they were in that situation because of their own choices and needed to find their own way out. Later, my stepmom called me to tell me what was happening, that my sister had been reaching out to people for help, and she warned me not to lend her anything. I understood where she was coming from. I had helped my sister before, even posting her bail the year before, and she never paid me back. After that experience, I decided it was best not to get financially involved again. A couple of hours later, I found myself at the emergency room, visiting my sister. Things had taken a horrifying turn. When no one agreed to help them financially, her husband became violent and attacked her. My sister was seriously injured and had to be treated at the hospital. Their teenage daughter tried to protect her mother and was also hurt in the process. It was an incredibly traumatic event for everyone involved, especially the children. He was arrested shortly after the incident and taken into custody. He stayed in jail while waiting for his trial. No one in the family chose to bail him out after learning what had happened. The state of Texas pursued serious charges because of the violence involved. Although prosecutors initially sought a lengthy sentence, the court ultimately gave him a 6-month rehabilitation and correctional program, followed by parole if completed successfully. He was also required to attend alcohol and substance counseling, as well as anger management classes. A restraining order was issued to protect my sister and their children, ensuring he could have no contact with them moving forward. He was convicted of 2 serious offenses, assault on his wife and assault on a minor, and is now legally prohibited from owning or possessing any kind of weapon. He's on probation for about 10 years, and if he violates the terms, he could lose his parole and serve the remainder of his original sentence, which could be up to 25 years. As part of his probation, he's subject to random drug and alcohol testing, which he has to pay for himself. He's also required to cover the costs of his probation officer visits, pay child support, and make restitution payments, all while keeping up with normal living expenses like rent and utilities. Every once in a while, I look up his name just to see if anything new has happened. Since completing his program, he's been arrested a few more times. One incident happened around Thanksgiving during the first year after his release, and another arrest occurred last year for public intoxication and providing a false name to an officer. He still hasn't paid any child support and hasn't made any effort to visit or communicate with his children. Although supervised visitation is allowed through legal channels, he hasn't taken any steps to be involved in their lives. Story 26. I had an internship last year, and during onboarding, the company leadership took everyone out to a rented bar. Each person received 2 drink tokens. Most of us were college students, so naturally there were a few who got a bit too rowdy. Beforehand, the company warned us, while we want you all to have fun, please remember to drink responsibly. People have ruined their internships with us in the past on this night. Of course, most of us ended up having more than 2 drinks, but since they had driven us there on coach buses and planned to take us back to a nearby hotel afterward, we figured it was fine. Well, one guy definitely pushed past his limit, and what happened next was incredibly hard to watch. On the bus ride back, one of the interns started getting obnoxiously loud. Then he stood up and began spouting racist nonsense, something about a so-called race war. The HR manager asked him very politely several times to sit down. That only made him angrier, and he ended up threatening to punch the manager in the face. When we finally arrived, the guy tried to drive home drunk while the HR manager frantically searched for someone to give him a ride. I never found out what happened to him afterward, but I'm certain his internship ended that weekend. It was wild watching someone completely throw away their career in a single night. I can't imagine having to go home and explain to your parents or guardians why you're back and not at your assignment. Story 27. I work at a shelter, and we once had a young man living with us whose parents had abandoned him when he was 6. The people and kids at the shelter were the only family he had left. In the months leading up to his 18th birthday, he built up a lot of debt, so we offered to let him stay longer to pay everything off before moving out. But he didn't make the best choices. On the day he turned 18, he signed a lease for an apartment where he planned to live with the girlfriend and kids of an older friend. Against all of our advice, at least he had a financial caretaker assigned, so we hoped things might eventually work out. Unfortunately, they didn't. He ignored his caretaker's calls, threw a party where he served hard alcohol to minors, and ended up getting evicted. Then he lost his job. After that, the friend who had taken him in kicked him out too. Now he's still in debt, without work or a home, all because he thought he was being smart and didn't want to live by our rules once he turned 18. Story 28. Honestly, I'm living proof that sometimes the quickest way to mess up your life is by never really giving it a chance. I'm 35 years old, and I'm staring down the possibility of being homeless within the next year. I've never had much real-world experience. I'm dealing with serious weight issues. I've never had a steady job outside of helping my dad deliver newspapers, and I cut myself off from people for years after high school. I never even got my high school diploma, even though I worked hard to make up for all the time I missed, and on top of that, I don't have a social security number, so I've never been able to get government help or start a proper job. Now at 35, I finally want to turn things around, but I have no idea where to start. It's overwhelming, but I'm trying to remind myself that even small steps count. Because the truth is, you can lose years, even decades, by not trying. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that doing nothing can be the most damaging choice of all. Story 29. I managed to ruin my own life pretty well when I was 18. My parents had recently divorced and my father had moved away. As soon as I got a job that could cover rent and I'd saved enough for a bond, I moved out of my mother's house. Being Mr. Popular, I started throwing huge parties in my flat and got completely sucked into that lifestyle. I thought it was cool to live by my unofficial slogan, "Screw it." Sounded badass at the time, right? To cut the story short, I stopped paying my rent and bills and started spending everything on nice clothes, drugs, and alcohol. Meanwhile, I neglected my family completely. I stopped talking to both my mom and dad, convinced I was living the dream when really, I was just digging myself deeper into a hole. I ended up working myself into serious debt, even owing a fair amount of money to local drug dealers. Eventually, my boss got tired of me showing up to work late and high. It had gotten pretty bad. I'd reached the point where doing a line of cocaine after brushing my teeth had become part of my morning routine, just to counter not having slept the night before. Then one day, I stepped out to pick up some weed and came back to find the locks changed on my flat door. All my belongings were inside, my clothes, my 2,000-pound gaming rig, and a lot of things that held both emotional and actual value, including my phone. The whole situation was completely messed up. I stood there realizing I had no idea what to do next. I had no job, no phone, nowhere to live, and only the clothes on my back. I walked to my mother's house, but she wasn't there. I ended up breaking in through a slightly open window and just lay on the carpet, crying. It turned out she had gone on a 6-month holiday to the United States. So I survived by eating my mother's food and found a few changes of clothes stored in the attic. After a while, I worked up the courage to see if I could break back into my old flat to recover some of my things. I climbed up the drain pipe and discovered that the entire place was empty, except for my large, low-to-the-ground bed. By some miracle, my phone was still under my pillow. I grabbed it, got out, went to the bank, withdrew my last 40 pounds and canceled my card, ordering a new one to be sent to my mother's address. On my way back to my mother's house, I ran into an old friend from school who invited me out for a drink and a game of pool. I accepted, mostly just to take my mind off everything. Over a few drinks, he asked how I'd been, and I told him, pretty casually, just how messed up things had gotten. He listened, and then, without hesitation, offered me a place to stay. He said I could take the spare room at his place if I found a job, and started paying back the drug dealers, so we wouldn't have anyone kicking down the front door. I nodded, grateful and a bit stunned, then turned to the woman behind the bar and asked if they were hiring. After a short conversation, she took me into the back room and had me sign a contract. Today, I have my own house, a mortgage, a good job, a girlfriend of 5 years, and a 1-year-old child. All my debts are paid off. I haven't touched drugs in about 7 years, and I drink only rarely. I've even started reconnecting with my family. No matter how deep a hole you dig for yourself, you can always find a way to climb out. You can always fix it. Story 30. Not a matter of seconds or minutes like some of the other stories here, and definitely not as critical, but still one that stuck with me. My best friend growing up never planned on pursuing anything beyond what he could get with a high school diploma. He lucked out and landed a job at a wholesale electrical parts warehouse. It turned out he had a natural talent for driving large delivery trucks and maneuvering them into tight spaces better than anyone else there. He started at minimum wage but was earning $16 an hour within 6 months. Before long, he was promoted to an in-house position cutting wire, which came with a big raise to $23 an hour. He was even slated for one of 2 warehouse manager positions, which would have bumped him up to $26 an hour, with yearly raises of $2 until reaching the $30 ceiling. Too bad he refused to give up smoking weed. I don't have anything against drug use, but if you work somewhere you care about as he did, and the company has a no drugs policy, it doesn't matter whether it's legal or not. If you break policy, they'll eventually find out, and you're finished. It doesn't matter if you think the rule is stupid. If you value your job, you stop doing the thing that breaks policy. My friend wasn't fired immediately after testing positive, though he technically should have been, because he was one of their best employees. Always prepared, always early, never showing up high, and never displaying any signs of addiction, the owner decided to give him another chance. He told my friend he'd be randomly selected again in the next screening, giving him plenty of time to get clean. But when that second test came around, he failed it too. He was given a third chance anyway, and he failed that one too. Now he's the manager of a Taco Bell, working for a salary that amounts to about $8 an hour, 12 hours a day, Monday through Friday. That also means he doesn't qualify for overtime pay. It's definitely not as tragic as some of the other stories I've heard, but it's still sad to see. He went from planning to buy his first new car and apply for a home loan to living in a tiny micro apartment in his mother's backyard, just scraping by from paycheck to paycheck. It's been about 4 to 5 years since then, and he's still at that Taco Bell. Story 31. A few years ago, when I was in the Navy, I was serving as the officer of the day. For our shore command, that basically meant I was the night watchman. Shortly after working hours, 2 young enlisted students walked into the Master-at-Arms office, where I was sitting with my counterpart, a chief. "Test us right now," they said. "We've been out in the car smoking pot all afternoon. We want out of the Navy." The chief didn't even hesitate. "Shut up and get out of here right now, and I'll forget this ever happened." But they doubled down. "Nope," one of them said. "We want out. We're high as kites and want a piss test." After we took the samples, sealed them, and finished the routine, we sat there with those 2 kids while the Master-at-Arms handled the final paperwork. The chief looked at them and asked, "Okay, what's the brilliant plan now?" One of them said, "Well, now that I'm done with the Navy, I'm going to use my GI Bill to go back to college and be an engineer." Folks, being discharged for marijuana use is a dishonorable discharge. That means no GI Bill, no veterans benefits, and a mark on your record roughly equivalent to a felony conviction for life. I watched as the chief calmly explained that to them, and I'll never forget the look on that kid's face. His eyes flicked toward the already sealed and signed urine container, the one he could never take back, and you could see it hit him all at once. He had just thrown away his future by choice after being given every chance to walk away. Watching him realize that more than half his plan for college funding had vanished, along with his eligibility for most loan programs, was something I'll never forget. Story 32. I went in for jury duty one day. After an hour or two, the clerk announced, "Anyone with a juror number between X and Y can leave for the week. Everyone else has to stay." I was one of the lucky ones who got to leave. I went up to the desk to collect my I really went to jury duty. I didn't just take a day off work paper. I was maybe fifth in line since I'd been sitting close to the desk. Suddenly, this guy cuts in front of everyone and starts yelling at the clerk handing out the forms. My time is more valuable than everyone else's here. You need to let me leave. I have very important business to attend to.
Do you know who I am?
The clerk tried to ignore him, but no one in line wanted to get too close. Then the guy made a big mistake. He reached out and put his hand on the clerk's shoulder. Within seconds, 3 cops tackled him to the ground. He was arrested for assaulting a civil servant. I doubt he kept his very important job after catching a felony charge, and I can't imagine him getting another one. From the moment he cut the line to the moment he was arrested, probably 2 minutes tops. Story 33. A new guy came to our school in Australia from New Zealand, and for some reason I was always the person who made friends with the new kid. Starting at a new school can be tough. We started hanging out and I introduced him to my friend group. The Islanders, the Polynesian kids at our school, were known for getting into a bit of mischief, smoking cigarettes, weed, skipping school, just the usual rebellious stuff. He began spending more time with them and I didn't mind. He got along with them really well. He was a genuinely sweet guy though. No matter who he was with, he'd always say hi to me and my friends whenever he saw us. The last time I saw him was at a pub. He was completely hammered and I told him that if he needed a lift home to come find me and I'd take him. He agreed. Later that night, on my drive home, I passed a terrible car crash. I didn't think much of it at the time, just another wreck on a dark road. The next morning, I got a call from a friend. He told me that the guy had stolen a car and tried to drive home drunk. When the police tried to pull him over, he didn't stop and a chase followed. He lost control, wrapped the car around a tree, and later died in the hospital while holding his mother's hand. He was 19 years old. I don't blame anyone for his death, but I'll always remember the time he first asked me about the crew, the Islanders he ended up hanging out with. Looking back, that was the moment he chose the path that ultimately led to his fate. I still drive past the spot where he crashed, and every time I do, I'm reminded how a single choice, something that seems so small in the moment, can change everything. Story 34. During her freshman year of college, my sister met, fell for, and married a musician who was convinced his big break was right around the corner. To support himself while he pursued his musical career, he drank. My sister had a scholarship to a solid college, not Ivy League, but respectable, and she was studying biochemistry. A year later, she was pregnant. She dropped out and started working full-time to support them and the baby, because the love of her life was too drunk to keep a job. 10 years and another child later, she finally divorced him, but by then, the damage was done. She replaced him with someone almost as useless, still works dead-end jobs, and lives in a house our grandmother paid for, just so her great-grandkids would have a roof over their heads without the constant fear of eviction. She went from being a promising college student with a real shot at a good future to working minimum-wage jobs and watching her husband drink away every cent they couldn't spare, all in less than a year. It's been more than 20 years since then, and things still haven't gotten better. I don't have much hope that they ever will. Story 35. My big brother had great grades. He was in the top 2 percentile on the SAT, the kind of score that could have easily set him up to become a doctor like our mom. He was very shy but incredibly kind. In high school, he had a teacher for a required course who told him to hand in an assignment before the end of the semester. He didn't do it, thinking he'd be fine since he'd done so well on the tests, even though the teacher had warned him. He failed that single class. It was an obligatory course, which meant he couldn't graduate properly and couldn't attend college. After that, things went downhill fast. When all his friends moved on to college, he was left behind. The loneliness hit him hard, and he fell into depression. Now he's 40 years old and has been unemployed for most of his adult life. He doesn't do drugs or waste time gaming. He just spends his days reading books, browsing Reddit, and living quietly in a cycle of shame and sadness. Our parents tried everything: encouragement, tough love, support, but nothing ever seemed to pull him out. The depression and isolation turned him from a normal introvert into an extreme one. He can only talk for maybe 20 minutes before retreating back into silence. Sitting with him is fine, but it's like being beside someone who's fading while still right in front of you. What should have been a small bump in the road ended up costing him everything. If he had just spent 2 hours on that homework, I'm 100% sure he would have followed his friends to college and probably become a programmer. I know it might sound like he's lazy, but the shame and depression he carries are unlike anything I've ever seen in another person. We had almost identical personalities, and his IQ was even higher than mine. The only reason I made it through an elite college was because I had friends by my side, people who struggled with me, who kept me going. It was dumb luck on my part, and terrible luck on his. In the end, it taught me something I'll never forget. Never underestimate the power of friendship or the damage loneliness can do. And remember that even the smallest setback can become catastrophic if depression and shame aren't taken seriously. Story 36. I'll start by saying that everything here was told to me by a mutual friend. An old friend of mine who was 20 at the time was a spoiled guy, but not a bad one. He was usually chill, non-confrontational, and easy to get along with. One night, he got insanely drunk at a party. Everything was fine until his younger sister started telling him to slow down. She either tried to take his car keys or the drink out of his hand. Whatever it was, he snapped. He ended up punching her in the face and breaking her nose. As far as I knew, and as far as any of our friends knew, he had never been violent. To say we were shocked would be an understatement. Someone at the party took his sister to the emergency room while he tried to get in his car. Thankfully, someone managed to stop him from driving, and he ended up staggering down the sidewalk in tears. That same night, his parents called the cops on him. He spent the night in the drunk tank, and the next morning they kicked him out. They stopped paying for his car, his tuition, and cut off his allowance completely. Within a week, he was broke and couch surfing. A few months later, he allegedly got drunk again and got into a fight with the person he was staying with and ended up back on the street. The last I heard, he'd been arrested after his car was repossessed. He tried to stop the tow truck by smashing its windows. Story 37. My ex was a straight-A student in both high school and university. She was also a college athlete, incredibly talented, driven, and focused. She had a full-ride scholarship to Texas A&M, where she was studying nursing. She was one of those people who could get along with anyone, genuinely sociable, friendly, and full of energy. She had absolutely no reason to change a thing about her life. Everything was going her way. By her second year of university, she was thriving, doing great for herself, both academically and socially. However, she had one persistent voice in her ear, her dad. He was the epitome of someone who peaked early in life and had been chasing that same high ever since. He'd served in the army when he was young and never stopped talking about it. He saw those years as the greatest time of his life. Because of that, he wanted his daughter to serve too. He claimed it was for her own good, but it was obvious he just wanted to live vicariously through her. He used every manipulation tactic in the book, constantly telling her that military medical training was better than anything she could learn in school, which was a complete lie. He also managed to convince her that her athletic career wouldn't last forever, and that she'd eventually lose her scholarships, which was complete nonsense, because she was genuinely talented and one of the best at what she did. On top of that, he laid on the guilt. He'd say things like, "The day you were born, I dreamed of the day I could salute you as a fellow serviceman." It was manipulative and heavy-handed, but she believed him. She and I had countless arguments about her dad. I could see clear as day that he was pulling her strings. By then, she was already 2 years into her degree. The smarter, safer choice was to stay the course. There was no reason to change direction. But in the end, she dropped out of university, scholarships and all, and joined the Navy. I watched her mental health deteriorate. Slowly at first, and then worse and worse over time. The military isn't as brutal as it once was, but it's still not an environment where everyone can thrive. She became anxious and depressed. The confident, determined woman I had fallen in love with turned into a shell of her former self, her self-esteem shattered, her motivation gone. Her original plan had been to serve the minimum 4 years of active duty and then go to medical school. But the last I heard from her, she was still serving, saying she didn't think she'd be able to make it through med school anymore. Her decision to enlist ultimately pushed us apart. She became distant, emotionally unavailable, and the connection we once had just faded away. This isn't meant as anti-military rhetoric. I have nothing but respect for the people who serve. My issue was never with the Navy itself. It was that joining wasn't the right decision for her. She had been on track to build a successful life of her own making, and now she's walking the same path her father did. Serving became the only thing she ever truly accomplished, and I know one day she'll regret that, though she'll probably hide the pain by convincing herself those were the best years of her life. If I had a time machine, I'd go back and argue with her dad, tell him to get off her back. I wish I had done more to convince her that she was going to be okay, that she didn't need to prove anything to anyone to have a good life. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.